The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust outside the Georgetown, Colorado post office. The sudden silence broken only by the snorting of tired horses and the creak of leather as the driver climbed down from his perch. June Evans clutched her worn carpet bag tightly, her knuckles white against the faded fabric. After 3 weeks of jarring travel from Philadelphia, she had finally arrived at her destination. Yet her stomach churned with more than just the motion sickness that had plagued her journey. The year was 1875, and at 22, June had made the most daring decision of her sheltered life. The advertisement had seemed like Providence when she'd first spotted it in the Philadelphia Chronicle. Hardworking rancher seeks bride of good character. Comfortable home provided. Georgetown, Colorado territory. Her response had been swift, and the exchange of letters that followed had been brief but promising. Franklin Ryder had seemed decent in his correspondence, straightforward, honest, and established enough to support a wife. Georgetown. The driver called out, already unloading trunks and parcels. Last stop. June was the final passenger remaining. She gathered her courage along with her skirts and stepped carefully down from the coach. The mountain air was thin and crisp, making her lungs burn slightly with each breath. The town itself was larger than she'd expected, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite it being May. "You must be Miss Evans," a voice called from the boardwalk. June turned to see the postmaster, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, approaching with an envelope in hand. "Mr. Ryder asked me to give you this should you arrive on today's coach. Said he'd be along shortly to collect you." June accepted the envelope with trembling fingers, breaking the simple wax seal to find a brief note inside. "We'll meet you at Harrigan's Hotel at noon. F. Ryder." She glanced at the town clock mounted on the face of the mercantile. 11:30, just enough time to freshen up after the journey. "Harrigan's is just down the street," the postmaster offered, pointing to a 3-story building with a wide porch. "Can't miss it." "Thank you," June replied, forcing a smile despite her apprehension. The hotel was clean and welcoming, with a parlor where June washed the dust from her face and hands in a porcelain basin. She studied her reflection in the small mirror above it, trying to see herself through a stranger's eyes. Her chestnut hair was neatly pinned beneath her bonnet, and her blue traveling dress, while not fashionable by Eastern standards, was respectable. Yet there was no disguising the fullness of her figure, the softness that had always set her apart from her willowy sisters. Growing up, June had often been described as sturdy or substantial, words meant to be kind, but that stung nonetheless. In her correspondence with Mr. Ryder, she had described herself as of average build, a description that, while not entirely honest, had stemmed from fear that the truth would eliminate her only chance at a new beginning. The clock in the parlor chimed noon, and June's heart leapt to her throat. She smoothed her skirts, pinched her cheeks for color, and waited. At precisely 12 minutes past the hour, the hotel door opened, and a tall man in a worn leather vest and dusty boots stepped inside. His face was tanned from years under the Colorado sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Dark blonde hair in need of a trim curled beneath the brim of his hat, which he promptly removed upon entering. His eyes, the clear blue of mountain lakes, scanned the room before settling on June. There was a moment, just a flicker, when something crossed his features. Surprise, disappointment. She couldn't be sure, but her stomach dropped all the same. "Miss Evans?" he asked, his voice deep and slightly hesitant. June stood, willing her knees not to tremble. "Mr. Ryder, I presume?" He crossed the room in 3 long strides, extending a calloused hand. "Franklin Ryder. Most folks call me Frank." His handshake was firm but gentle. "How was your journey?" "Long," June admitted, "but educational. I've never been west of the Mississippi before." Frank nodded, an awkward silence stretching between them. His eyes kept darting to her face, then away as if he wasn't sure where to look. "Perhaps we could sit," June suggested, gesturing to the parlor chairs. "Of course," he agreed, pulling one out for her before taking a seat himself. He cleared his throat. "I must admit, you're not quite what I expected." There it was, the word she had dreaded since stepping off the stagecoach. "I see," June replied, her voice smaller than she intended. "And what did you expect, Mr. Ryder?" Frank ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "It's just your letters didn't mention, you described yourself differently." June's cheeks burned. "If my appearance disappoints you, I understand. I can arrange to return east on the next stagecoach." Her voice cracked despite her efforts to maintain dignity. Frank's eyebrows shot up in alarm. "No, no, that's not what I meant at all." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I was just surprised is all. Truth be told, I wasn't entirely forthright in my letters either." This caught June off guard. "How so?" "I described my ranch as comfortable. It's decent enough, but it's still rough around the edges. We've had a hard couple of years with the drought." He looked down at his hands. "I'd understand if that changes your mind about staying." June studied him, this man who was to be her husband. There was a steadiness to him, a genuineness that hadn't come through in his letters. "Mr. Ryder," she began carefully, "I came west knowing it would be different from Philadelphia. I'm prepared for hard work and simple living. What I'm not prepared for is being judged solely on my appearance." Frank's expression shifted to one of genuine remorse. "You're absolutely right, and I apologize." He hesitated, then added with a small smile that reached his eyes, "Besides, that just means there's more of you to love." The simple statement, delivered without pretense, melted something in June's chest. It wasn't eloquent poetry, but there was an honesty to it that touched her more deeply than flowery words could have. "Well," she said, her own smile tentative but genuine, "I suppose we should get to know each other a bit better before the wedding. When did you have in mind?" Frank looked startled. "You're still willing to go through with it?" "Unless you've changed your mind," he shook his head quickly. "Not at all. I just thought, well, most women would have been on the next stage out after such a poor welcome." June smoothed her skirts. "I'm not most women, Mr. Ryder." A slow grin spread across his face. "No, you certainly aren't." He stood, offering his hand again. "Let me buy you dinner, Miss Evans. There's a decent restaurant just down the street and you must be starved after your journey." June accepted his hand, feeling a flutter of hope replace the dread that had settled in her stomach. "I'd like that very much." They walked out into the bright Colorado sunshine, the bustling town of Georgetown surrounding them with its promises and possibilities. June didn't know what the future held with this straight-talking rancher, but for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she allowed herself to believe it might be something wonderful after all. The restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and windows that looked out onto the main street. Frank pulled out June's chair before taking his own seat across from her, removing his hat and placing it on an empty chair beside him. "The stew is good here," he offered, "and they make a fine apple pie." "That sounds perfect," June replied, grateful for the recommendation. She was ravenous after the long journey, but also nervous about eating in front of this man who would become her husband. Would he judge her appetite as harshly as her figure? A middle-aged waitress approached their table, her face lighting up with recognition. "Frank Ryder, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you in town for weeks." Frank smiled warmly. "Hello, Mrs. Peterson. Been busy with the spring calving." "This here is Miss June Evans, recently arrived from Philadelphia." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened with understanding. "Oh, the bride you've been expecting." She turned to June with a beaming smile. "Welcome to Georgetown, my dear. We've all been curious about the woman who captured our Frank's interest through letters alone." June felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you for the welcome." After they ordered stew and biscuits for them both, with pie to follow, an awkward silence settled over the table. "Tell me about your ranch," June finally ventured, desperate to break the tension. Frank's face relaxed. "It's about 10 miles outside of town in a small valley with a creek running through it. Nothing fancy, but the water's good and the grazing land is better than most in these parts. I've got about 60 head of cattle, 4 horses, and a handful of chickens." He paused, adding, "and a dog named Buck who thinks he owns the place." June smiled at this. "It sounds lovely." "It's hard work," Frank warned, his expression turning serious. "The winters are harsh, and we're isolated when the snow comes. The nearest neighbor is 3 miles away." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Ryder. My father died when I was 16, leaving my mother with 5 daughters and a millinery shop to run. I've been helping to support my family ever since." Frank studied her with new interest. "You never mentioned that in your letters." "You never asked about my family circumstances," June countered gently. He acknowledged this with a nod. "Fair enough. What made you answer my advertisement?" "There must have been plenty of men looking for wives in Philadelphia." June considered her answer carefully. "I wanted a fresh start. Philadelphia holds painful memories. And truthfully, I was intrigued by the idea of the West. My youngest sister is forever reading dime novels about frontier adventures. I hope you won't be disappointed. Real ranching life isn't much like those stories." "I didn't expect it would be," June replied, "but I'm adaptable." Their food arrived, steaming bowls of rich stew that smelled heavenly. June hesitated only briefly before picking up her spoon. She was too hungry to maintain pretenses. Frank seemed to sense her discomfort. "Please eat. Don't stand on ceremony with me. I've been up since dawn, and I'm famished myself." His straightforwardness put her at ease, and soon they were both enjoying their meal, the silence now companionable rather than strained. "So," Frank said after a while, "I've arranged for Reverend Michaels to marry us tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. I know it's sudden, but tomorrow—" June nearly choked on her biscuit. Frank looked concerned. "Is that too soon, I thought, since you've traveled all this way?" June took a sip of water, composing herself. "It's just we barely know each other. Wouldn't it be prudent to wait a little while?" Frank's brow furrowed. "We've been corresponding for 3 months. And frankly, Miss Evans, Georgetown isn't the kind of place where an unmarried man and woman can spend much time together without causing talk. Besides, the ranch needs attention. I've already been away longer than I intended, meeting you." June could see the practical considerations, even if her heart raced at the idea of marrying a virtual stranger so quickly. "What if we're not suited? What if, after a few days, you decide I'm not what you wanted after all?" Frank's expression softened. "Marriage is always a risk, whether you've known someone for 3 days or 3 years. I'm willing to take that chance if you are." He paused, adding quietly, "Unless you'd prefer to return east after all." The question hung between them. June thought of Philadelphia, of the empty future that awaited her there, more years of working in her mother's shop, watching her sisters marry and start families, the weight of a broken engagement still shadowing her reputation. "No," she said finally. "I came here to start a new life, and that's what I intend to do. Tomorrow afternoon will be fine, Mr. Ryder." Frank's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Thank you, and please call me Frank." "Frank," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. They finished their meal with lighter conversation. Frank told her about Georgetown's history as a silver mining town, about the neighboring ranches, and about the changing seasons in the mountains. June shared stories of her sisters and described Philadelphia's bustling streets and shops. By the time they finished their apple pie, June found herself genuinely smiling, her earlier anxiety partially eased by Frank's straightforward manner and evident decency. "I've arranged a room for you here at Harrigan's for tonight," Frank said as they left the restaurant. "I'll come by around noon tomorrow to take you to the church." "What should I bring to the ranch?" June asked. "I wasn't sure what would be needed, so I packed mostly practical clothing and a few keepsakes." "That's perfect. The cabin is furnished with the basics. It's not fancy, but we can make improvements over time if you like." They had reached the hotel entrance. Frank hesitated, then awkwardly took her hand. "I'm glad you came, June, despite my clumsy welcome." His eyes met hers, sincere and warm. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding down the boardwalk toward the livery stable where he'd left his horse. June watched him go, a mixture of trepidation and hope swirling inside her. In less than 24 hours, she would be Mrs. Franklin Ryder, mistress of a ranch she'd never seen, wife to a man she barely knew. What have I gotten myself into? She wondered, climbing the stairs to her room. Yet beneath the anxiety was a flicker of something else, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, this impulsive journey west might lead to happiness after all. Morning came too quickly, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of June's hotel room. She had slept fitfully, dreams of Philadelphia mingling with visions of mountain landscapes she'd never seen. Rising, she splashed cold water on her face and began the task of preparing for her wedding day. She'd brought one good dress for the occasion, a deep blue silk that complemented her fair complexion. It wasn't a proper wedding gown, but it was the finest thing she owned. As she fastened the buttons, she couldn't help remembering the last time she'd prepared for a wedding her own, 3 years ago in Philadelphia. Robert Ashton had been everything a young woman could want in a fiancé, handsome, wealthy, from one of Philadelphia's oldest families. Their courtship had been proper and supervised, with chaperoned walks through Fairmount Park and tea in her mother's parlor. The engagement had been announced in the newspaper, the wedding planned for St. Mark's Church, with 200 guests and a reception at the Ashton estate. 1 week before the wedding, Robert had visited her mother's home, asking to speak with June privately. In the small garden behind the house, he had taken her hands in his and told her that he couldn't go through with it. He'd fallen in love with someone else, Eliza Whitmore, the willowy blonde daughter of his father's business partner. "You're a wonderful woman, June," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "But Eliza and we're better suited. Surely you can see that." The scandal had been immense. June had faced pitying looks and whispered gossip for months afterward. Even now, the memory made her cheeks burn with humiliation. "Never again," she whispered to her reflection as she pinned up her hair. "Never again will I let someone make me feel less than worthy." At precisely noon, a knock came at her door. June took a deep breath, gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk containing her possessions, and opened it to find Frank standing there, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and string tie, his usually unruly hair slicked back with pomade. "You look lovely," he said, his voice gruff with sincerity. "Thank you," June replied, surprised by the compliment. "You look very handsome yourself." Frank's ears reddened. "I don't dress up often. Feels like I'm being strangled." He tugged at the tie. "Ready to go?" June nodded, her throat suddenly too tight for words. The church was a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple, set slightly apart from Georgetown's main thoroughfare. As they approached, June saw a small gathering on the steps, 3 women and 2 men, all watching their approach with undisguised curiosity. "I hope you don't mind," Frank said quietly. "Word spread about the wedding. Some folks wanted to witness it." Before June could respond, one of the women hurried forward. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and graying brown hair tucked beneath a sensible bonnet. "You must be Miss Evans. I'm Martha Wilson. My husband Doc Wilson and I have known Frank since he first came to these parts." She took June's hands in her own. "We're so pleased to welcome you to Georgetown." "Thank you," June managed, touched by the warm reception. The others introduced themselves as well, the Reverend Michaels and his wife Sarah, and Daniel Cooper, owner of the general store and apparently one of Frank's closest friends. "Frank's been a confirmed bachelor so long, we'd about given up hope," Daniel joked, clapping Frank on the shoulder. "You must be something special to have changed his mind through letters alone." Frank cleared his throat, clearly embarrassed. "Shall we proceed, Reverend? Miss Evans has had a long journey." The ceremony was brief and simple. Standing before the altar, June repeated the familiar vows, her voice steadier than she'd expected. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Frank hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on her lips, their first physical contact beyond handshakes. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, the kiss gentle and over too quickly for June to process how it made her feel. "Congratulations," Martha Wilson exclaimed, the first to embrace June after the ceremony. "We must have you over for supper soon, once you're settled." "That would be lovely," June replied, genuinely touched by the kindness of these strangers. After receiving congratulations from the small group, Frank led June to a wagon waiting outside the church. He helped her up to the bench seat before loading her trunk and carpet bag into the back. "I borrowed Daniel's wagon to bring you out to the ranch," he explained as he climbed up beside her. "It's more comfortable than riding double on my horse, especially for the distance." As they pulled away from the church, June caught a glimpse of the small group waving from the steps. She waved back, then turned to face the road ahead and her new life. The journey to the ranch took nearly 3 hours, following a rutted track that wound through pine forests and open meadows. Frank pointed out landmarks as they traveled, distant peaks with names like Grizzly Mountain and Silver Plume, the creek that would eventually pass through their property, an abandoned mining claim that had once promised fortune and delivered only disappointment. June listened, asking questions when appropriate, but mostly she absorbed the vastness of the landscape. Philadelphia, with its crowded streets and row houses, seemed impossibly distant. Here, the sky stretched endlessly overhead, the horizon broken only by mountains that dwarfed anything she had ever seen. "It's overwhelming," she admitted when Frank asked what she thought of the country. "Beautiful, but so immense it makes me feel very small." Frank nodded in understanding. "I felt the same way when I first came west. I was 18, full of big ideas about striking it rich in the silver mines." He smiled ruefully. "Spent 2 years breaking my back underground before I realized mining wasn't my calling. Used what little I'd saved to buy a few head of cattle instead." "And now you have 60, June observed. "God willing and the creek don't rise, I'll have 100 by next year." There was pride in his voice. "The beef market's strong with Denver growing so fast." They crested a small rise and Frank pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said, gesturing toward the valley below. "Ryder Ranch." June followed his gaze. The valley was beautiful, a green oasis nestled between rocky slopes. A small creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, and clustered near its bank were several structures: a modest log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, and what appeared to be a chicken coop and corral. Cattle dotted the meadow beyond, grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. "It's lovely," June said, meaning it. Frank's expression softened. "It's not much compared to city living, but it's perfect," June interrupted. "Truly." He studied her face as if trying to determine her sincerity. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once and flicked the reins, sending the wagon down the slope toward the cabin. As they approached, a large brown dog came bounding from the direction of the barn, barking enthusiastically. "That's Buck," Frank said with a chuckle. "Don't worry, his bark is worse than his bite. He's friendly once he knows you're not a threat." The dog circled the wagon as Frank brought it to a halt in front of the cabin. He jumped down and came around to help June descend, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. Buck approached cautiously, sniffing at the hem of June's dress. She extended a hand for him to investigate, and after a moment's consideration, he licked her fingers and wagged his tail. "He approves," Frank said, sounding relieved. "That's a good sign." June smiled, reaching down to scratch the dog behind his ears. "Hello, Buck. I hope we'll be good friends." Frank unloaded her trunk and carpet bag from the wagon. "Let me show you the cabin before I tend to the horses." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and sitting space, and a smaller bedroom separated by a door that actually closed, something June hadn't been certain she'd find in frontier housing. The furnishings were simple but solid. A table with 4 chairs, a cupboard for dishes, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a double bed in the bedroom covered with a colorful quilt. "Martha Wilson made the quilt as a housewarming gift when I built the cabin," Frank explained, following her gaze. "She'll be pleased to know it's finally serving its intended purpose." June blushed at the implication. This was her wedding day, and tonight she would share that bed with her new husband, a man she had known for less than 24 hours. As if sensing her discomfort, Frank cleared his throat. "I'll bring your things in, then see to the horses and evening chores. Take your time getting settled." He hesitated, then added awkwardly, "I'm sure you'd like some privacy after the long journey." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving June alone in what was now her home. She took a deep breath, running her hand along the rough-hewn table. This was real. She was really here in Colorado territory, married to a rancher she barely knew, miles from the nearest town. Rather than giving in to the momentary panic that threatened to overwhelm her, June decided to focus on practical matters. She unpacked her trunk, hanging her dresses on pegs along the bedroom wall and arranging her few personal items: a hairbrush, a small mirror, a daguerreotype of her mother and sisters, a book of Tennyson's poetry that had been her father's on a small chest of drawers. In the kitchen, she found the cupboard stocked with basic provisions: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, and dried meat. A small root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the floor contained potatoes, onions, and carrots, along with several jars of preserved fruits and vegetables. June had just begun to consider what to prepare for supper when Frank returned, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. "Everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, sounding genuinely concerned. "Yes, thank you," June replied. "I was just thinking about supper." "I noticed you have a good supply of provisions." "I stocked up in town yesterday," Frank admitted. "Wasn't sure what you might need." June appreciated the thoughtfulness of this gesture. "I could fry some potatoes and bacon if that sounds agreeable." "That sounds perfect." "Let me just wash up first." While Frank went outside to use the pump, June busied herself with meal preparations. By the time he returned, his hair damp and his face clean-shaven, She had potatoes sizzling in a cast iron skillet and bacon crisping alongside them. They ate at the table, the silence broken only by the clink of forks against plates and the occasional appreciative comment from Frank about the meal. June found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands, though rough with calluses, handled his utensils with unexpected grace, the slight curl to his hair as it dried. "I forgot to ask," Frank said suddenly. "Do you have a preferred side of the bed?" June nearly choked on her water. I beg your pardon," Frank's ears reddened. "I just meant for sleeping. Some folks are particular about which side they sleep on. I don't care either way." "Oh, I suppose the right side, if it makes no difference to you." He nodded, clearly as uncomfortable with the conversation as she was. "Right side it is, then." After supper, June insisted on washing the dishes while Frank went out to make a final check on the livestock. By the time he returned, she had changed into her nightgown and wrapper, her hair loose around her shoulders. Frank stopped short in the doorway, clearly startled to find her in such a state of undress, modest though her attire was. "I'll just—" He gestured vaguely toward the bedroom. "Give you some privacy, to prepare for bed." June nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Thank you." While Frank was in the bedroom, presumably changing into his own night clothes, June sat in the rocking chair by the now banked fire, trying to calm her racing heart. She had known this moment would come, of course. It was the natural conclusion to a wedding day. But the reality of sharing a bed with a virtual stranger, becoming truly his wife in every sense, was more daunting than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. "June," Frank's voice called softly from the bedroom. "I'm decent if you'd like to come in." Taking a deep breath, June rose and crossed to the bedroom door. Frank was already in bed, the covers pulled to his waist, his chest bare save for a light dusting of golden hair. He had left a candle burning on her side of the bed. "I can blow out the light if you'd prefer privacy," he offered. "No, that's all right." June shed her wrapper, hanging it on one of the wall pegs, acutely aware of Frank's gaze. She climbed into bed beside him, keeping to the very edge of her side. Frank reached over to extinguish the candle, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint moonlight filtering through the single window. "Good night, June," he said quietly. "Good night, Frank." June lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, listening to Frank's breathing beside her. After several minutes, he spoke again. "June, are you still awake?" "Yes." There was a rustle of bedclothes as he turned toward her. "I want you to know something. I understand this is unusual, getting married so quickly to someone you've only just met in person. I want you to know that I don't expect—" He paused, clearly searching for the right words. "What I mean to say is I'm willing to wait until you're comfortable with me." The unexpected consideration in his words brought tears to June's eyes, which she was grateful he couldn't see in the darkness. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's very kind." "It's not kindness," Frank replied. "It's respect. I want this marriage to work, June. I want us both to be happy in it." June felt some of the tension leave her body. "I want that too." "Good." There was a smile in his voice. "Then we're in agreement on the most important thing already." With that, he turned back to his side of the bed, and soon his breathing deepened into the regular rhythm of sleep. June lay awake a while longer, considering the man beside her, this stranger who was now her husband, who had surprised her with his thoughtfulness more than once today. Perhaps, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, this marriage of convenience might grow into something genuine after all. June woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain pattering against the cabin roof. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in Philadelphia, in her narrow bed in the room she shared with her youngest sister. Then she saw the log walls, felt the unfamiliar quilt beneath her fingers, and remembered. She was in Colorado. She was married. To a man who was apparently already up and about, judging by the empty space beside her and the coffee aroma wafting from the main room. Hastily, June rose and dressed in a simple work dress of brown calico, pinning her hair in a practical bun at the nape of her neck. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Frank at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning," he said, glancing up with a smile that transformed his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Hope you like your eggs over easy. It's about the only way I know how to cook them without breaking the yolks." "Over easy is perfect," June replied, surprised and touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to cook breakfast." Frank shrugged. "I usually get up with the sun to tend to the livestock. Didn't see any reason to wake you when you're probably still tired from your journey." June moved to the cupboard, taking out plates and cups. "I'm used to early rising. My mother's shop opens at 8, and there's always baking and housework to be done before that." "Well, there's plenty of early rising to be done on a ranch," Frank said, sliding eggs onto the plates June had set on the table. "But today's a bit different with the rain. Can't do much outside until it lets up." They ate in companionable silence, the rain providing a soothing backdrop to the meal. June found herself sneaking glances at her new husband, still somewhat amazed at the turn her life had taken. "What would you like me to do today?" she asked when they had finished. "I want to be useful." Frank considered this. "Well, the pantry could use organizing, and there's mending. I've been putting off shirts with missing buttons, that sort of thing. But don't feel you need to dive into everything at once. Take time to get your bearings." June appreciated his consideration but was eager to prove her worth. "I'll start with the pantry, then see to the mending. I'm a fair hand with a needle." The morning passed quickly as June set about organizing the kitchen and pantry. Frank moved between the cabin and the barn, tending to necessary chores despite the rain. By midday, the downpour had eased to a gentle drizzle, and June had the satisfaction of seeing the pantry transformed shelves neatly arranged, preserves grouped by type, flour and sugar stored in proper crocks to protect against pests. She was just setting out bread and cheese for the midday meal when the cabin door opened and Frank entered, followed by a gust of damp air. "Looks like the rain might clear by evening," he said, removing his wet coat and hanging it by the door. His eyes widened as he took in the transformed kitchen. "Well now, that's a sight. I haven't seen those shelves so orderly since, well, ever." June couldn't help but feel pleased at his obvious appreciation. "I hope I haven't overstepped. I wasn't sure where you preferred things to be kept." "Overstepped? Not at all." Frank shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's your home now too, June. You should arrange things as suits you." The words "your home" sent a warm feeling through June's chest. It had been a long time since she'd felt truly at home anywhere. After their simple meal, June settled in the rocking chair with Frank's mending while he went back out to check on a calf that had been born the previous week. The steady rhythm of needle and thread was soothing, allowing her mind to wander as she worked. She thought of her mother and sisters back in Philadelphia, wondering if her letter announcing her marriage had arrived yet. They had been skeptical of her plan to become a mail-order bride, especially after the disaster of her broken engagement. Only her youngest sister, Mary, had shown real enthusiasm, captivated by the romantic notion of starting a new life in the West. "You're the bravest of us all," Mary had whispered as they embraced at the train station. "Promise you'll write and tell me everything about Colorado." June had promised, though she'd had no idea what she would actually have to write about. Now, sitting in this cozy cabin with rain tapping on the roof and her new husband's shirt in her hands, She realized she had quite a story to tell after all. The door opened and Frank entered, bringing with him the scent of rain and pine. "Calf's doing well," he reported, removing his wet hat and coat. "Mother's taking good care of him." He noticed the shirt in her lap. "You didn't have to do that today." "I wanted to," June replied, holding up the shirt to show the nearly invisible stitches where she had mended a tear along one seam. "Besides, it gave me something to do while you were out." Frank crossed the room, taking the shirt from her hands to examine her work. "This is fine stitching. Much better than my clumsy attempts. I used to help my mother with alterations for her customers," June explained. "She always said I had a natural talent for detailed work." Frank handed the shirt back, his fingers briefly brushing against hers. She was right. He glanced toward the window, where the rain had finally stopped, revealing patches of blue sky. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch now that the weather's clearing? No sense staying cooped up inside on your first full day here." June set aside the mending eagerly. "I'd like that very much." They spent the remainder of the afternoon touring the property. Frank showed her the barn, introducing her to the horses his own mount. A sturdy chestnut gelding named Rusty, a gentle mare called Daisy who could be harnessed to the plow or wagon as needed, and two younger horses he was training for eventual sale. The chickens clucked and scattered as they approached the coop, and Frank pointed out the vegetable garden, explaining apologetically that it had gone somewhat wild in his bachelor neglect. "I try to grow basic things: potatoes, carrots, beans, but I'm a better rancher than gardener," he admitted. "I could tend the garden," June offered. "We had a small one behind our house in Philadelphia. Nothing extensive, but I know the basics." Frank's face brightened. "Would you? That would be a real help. I end up trading beef for vegetables with the Wilsons most summers when my garden fails." They walked along the creek that bordered the property, Frank pointing out the best fishing spots and the place where deer often came to drink at dusk. June marveled at the clarity of the water, so different from the muddy Schuylkill River she was accustomed to. "It's beautiful here," she said, breathing in the pine-scented air. "So peaceful." Frank nodded, his gaze on the distant mountains. "That's why I stayed after my mining days ended. Some folks can't stand the quiet, the isolation, but for me—" He trailed off, searching for words. "It feels right," June finished for him. He looked at her, surprise and pleasure mingling in his expression. "Yes, exactly that." As they walked back toward the cabin, the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, June felt a subtle shift in her perception of this man beside her. He wasn't just the stranger she had married out of desperation and practical necessity. He was Frank Ryder, a man who had carved a life from this wilderness through hard work and determination, who treated her with a consideration she hadn't expected, who looked at mountain sunsets with genuine appreciation in his eyes. That night at supper, the conversation flowed more easily between them. Frank told her stories about his early days in Colorado, about the friends he'd made and the harsh winters he'd survived. June shared tales of her sister's antics and her mother's millinery shop, describing the fashionable hats that had been her specialty to create. After the dishes were cleaned and put away, they sat by the fire, Frank in a straight-back chair, June in the rocker, a comfortable silence between them. "I've been thinking," Frank said eventually. "We should ride into town on Saturday, introduce you properly to folks, stock up on any supplies you might need." He paused, adding, "And I thought you might like to send a letter to your family, let them know you've arrived safely." The thoughtfulness of this suggestion touched June deeply. "I'd like that very much, thank you." Frank nodded, his eyes warm in the firelight. "It's settled then. Saturday it is." When they retired to bed that night, the awkwardness of the previous evening was diminished but not entirely gone. June changed in the bedroom while Frank washed up outside, then they switched places. When they finally lay side by side in the darkness, however, June found herself less rigid, less anxious than before. "Good night, Frank," she whispered. "Good night, June," he replied, his voice soft in the darkness. After a moment he added, "I'm glad you're here." June smiled into the darkness, a small hope blooming in her heart. "So am I." The days fell into a rhythm as June adjusted to ranch life. Each morning, Frank rose before dawn to tend to the livestock while June prepared breakfast. They would eat together as the sun rose, discussing the day ahead. Then Frank would return to his work with the cattle, while June tackled domestic chores, cleaning, cooking, mending, and gradually bringing the neglected vegetable garden back to life. Despite her city upbringing, June took to rural living with a determination that surprised even herself. She learned to collect eggs without being pecked by the suspicious hens, to churn butter from the cream Frank brought back from occasional milk trades with a neighboring farm, and to bake bread in the temperamental iron stove that required constant attention to maintain an even temperature. Each evening after supper, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Frank might whittle or clean his tools while June sewed or wrote in her journal. It was a simple existence, but June found an unexpected contentment in the routine. As promised, on Saturday they rode into Georgetown. June perched somewhat nervously on Daisy while Frank led the way on Rusty. The ride took nearly 2 hours, but the scenery was so spectacular that June hardly noticed the time passing. Georgetown was bustling with weekend activity when they arrived. The main street crowded with wagons and townspeople going about their business. June felt the curious stares as Frank helped her dismount in front of the general store, aware that she was being assessed as the mail-order bride who had apparently passed muster with the reserved rancher. "Frank Ryder," Daniel Cooper called from the store entrance, "and Mrs. Ryder." "Come in, come in. Martha Wilson's inside and about to burst with excitement at seeing you again." Inside the store, June was immediately enveloped in a warm embrace by Martha Wilson. "My dear girl, how are you settling in? Frank's cabin is comfortable enough, I hope. Have you everything you need?" The questions came in a rush, Martha's genuine concern evident in every word. "I'm settling in very well, thank you," June replied, touched by the older woman's kindness. "The cabin is lovely, and Frank has been most considerate." Martha beamed, glancing at Frank with obvious approval. "I always said he'd make someone a fine husband once he got around to it." She lowered her voice, adding, "Though between us, I had nearly given up hope. 34 is well past time for a man to take a wife." June hadn't known Frank's exact age until that moment, 11 years her senior. The knowledge settled comfortably in her mind, fitting with the stability and quiet confidence he projected. While Frank discussed cattle prices and weather predictions with Daniel and several other ranchers who had materialized upon their arrival, Martha led June through the store, helping her select fabric for new curtains, seeds for the garden, and a few modest luxuries: a bar of lavender soap, a packet of English tea, and a small bottle of rose water. "A woman needs her little comforts, even on a ranch," Martha insisted when June protested the expense. "And Frank can well afford it. He's one of the more successful ranchers in these parts, though he'd never boast of it." This was news to June, who had assumed from Frank's modest lifestyle that they would need to be frugal. Martha, seeing her surprise, smiled knowingly. "Frank lives simply because that's his nature, not because he must. He's been saving for years for a wife, for a family, though he'd die before admitting as much." She patted June's hand. "You've married a good man, my dear, one of the best." The conversation gave June much to think about as they completed their shopping and visited the post office, where she mailed a long letter to her family describing her journey, her wedding, and her new home. She deliberately kept the tone cheerful and optimistic, knowing her mother would worry otherwise. The truth was, she had no real complaints to share. Frank had been nothing but kind and respectful, and the ranch, while requiring hard work, was a peaceful haven. They ate lunch at the same restaurant where they'd first dined together less than a week earlier, though it felt to June as if months had passed since that awkward meal. Today, the conversation flowed naturally between them, with Frank asking her opinion on various purchases and June sharing her ideas for improvements to the garden and cabin. As they prepared to leave town, Martha insisted they come for Sunday dinner the following weekend. "No arguments," she said firmly when Frank began to protest the distance. "James and I won't take no for an answer. June needs friends here and you could use the socialization yourself, Franklin Ryder." Frank acquiesced with good grace and they began the journey home, the wagon now laden with their purchases. June found herself looking forward to the dinner invitation, realizing how much she missed female companionship despite her growing comfort with Frank. The ride home was peaceful, the afternoon sun warm on their backs as the wagon rumbled along the familiar trail. About halfway to the ranch, Frank suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt. "Look there," he said quietly, pointing toward a small clearing near the creek. "Deer." June followed his gaze to see a doe and two fawns drinking at the water's edge, their delicate movements almost ethereal in the dappled sunlight. "They're beautiful," she whispered, entranced by the scene. Frank nodded, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "This is why I love this land. Moments like this." The simple statement, spoken with such genuine feeling, touched something deep within June. She looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw not just the practical rancher or the considerate provider, but a man capable of appreciating beauty and wonder. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his on the wagon seat. Frank looked startled for a moment, then turned his hand palm up, entwining their fingers. They sat in silence, watching the deer until the animals melted back into the forest, leaving only ripples on the creek's surface to mark their passage. Neither mentioned the moment as they continued their journey, but something had shifted between them, a small but significant step toward the genuine connection they were slowly building. That night, as they prepared for bed, Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. "I was thinking. Tomorrow's Sunday, and while we can't make it to church in town, we could take it easy here. Maybe go fishing if you'd like to learn." "I'd enjoy that," June replied, surprised and pleased by the suggestion. "I've never been fishing before." Frank looked scandalized. "Never been fishing?" "Well, that's something we need to remedy right away." June laughed at his expression. "Remember, I'm a city girl. The closest I've come to fishing is buying it from the market stall." "All the more reason to teach you," Frank insisted. "Every ranch wife should know how to catch her own supper if need be." The phrase ranch wife sent a small thrill through June. It had been a week since their wedding, and while they were husband and wife in name and shared a roof, there remained an invisible barrier between them, the natural hesitation of two strangers navigating a relationship that had begun backward, with marriage preceding courtship. Yet with each passing day, that barrier grew thinner. June found herself noticing small things about Frank, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness in his calloused hands when he handled newborn animals, the deep timbre of his voice when he hummed to himself while working. And she had caught him watching her as well, when he thought she wouldn't notice, studying her with a mixture of curiosity and something warmer, something that made her cheeks flush when their eyes met unexpectedly. True to his word, Sunday morning found them at the creek, fishing poles in hand. Frank was a patient teacher, showing June how to bait her hook, a process she found both fascinating and mildly disgusting, and how to cast the line with a smooth, controlled motion. "The trick is to be patient," he explained as they sat side by side on the creek bank. "Fish can sense movement and noise. The quieter you are, the better your chances." June nodded, trying to emulate his stillness. The morning was peaceful, the only sounds the gentle gurgle of the creek, the occasional call of a bird, and the soft buzz of insects in the tall grass. It was so different from Philadelphia's constant clamor of carriages, vendors, and pedestrians that June found herself relaxing into a near meditative state. "It's like a different world," she said softly, not wanting to disturb the fish but needing to express the thought. Frank nodded, understanding her meaning without explanation. "That's why I stayed. Even on the hardest days when drought threatens the herd or wolves pick off calves, there's a peace here that I never found anywhere else." "Where were you before Colorado?" June asked, realizing she knew little of her husband's past before his mining days. "Ohio originally. My father had a small farm near Columbus. After he died, my mother remarried a man who had no use for another man's son. I left home at 16, worked my way west doing odd jobs, farmhand, stable boy, whatever would earn enough for the next leg of the journey." The matter-of-fact way he described what must have been a difficult time touched June deeply. "That couldn't have been easy," Frank shrugged. "It made me who I am, taught me to rely on myself, to work hard for what I want." He glanced at her, then back at the water. "What about you? You've mentioned your sisters and your mother's shop, but not much else about Philadelphia." June hesitated, unsure how much to share about her past. But if they were to build a real marriage, honesty seemed essential. "My father was a bookkeeper for a shipping company, not wealthy, but comfortable enough to provide for us. When he died of influenza, Mother took over the millinery shop where she'd worked as a girl. My older sisters married well enough, but I stayed to help with the business and my younger sisters." She paused, then decided to continue. "I was engaged once, 3 years ago, to a man from a good family. He broke it off a week before the wedding for someone else." Frank's expression darkened. "He was a fool." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, warmed June from within. Before she could respond, her fishing pole jerked sharply in her hands. "You've got one," Frank exclaimed. "Quick, start reeling it in. Steady now, don't let the line go slack." June's heart raced as she followed his instructions, feeling the fish fight against the hook. With Frank's guidance, she successfully landed a respectable rainbow trout, its scales glittering in the sunlight. "I did it," she cried, laughing with delight as Frank helped her remove the hook. "You certainly did," he agreed, his smile wide and genuine. "And a fine first catch it is. We'll have it for supper tonight." The pride in his voice made June's achievement feel significant despite its simplicity. By the end of the morning, they had caught 4 trout between them, enough for a hearty meal with some left over for breakfast. As they walked back to the cabin, fishing poles over their shoulders and the cleaned fish wrapped in a cloth, June felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. This simple life, far from the social pressures and judgments of Philadelphia society, offered a freedom she hadn't known she craved. Frank prepared the fish for cooking, showing June how to season them with herbs from the small patch that grew near the cabin door. They worked together in the kitchen, moving around each other with increasing ease, and by the time they sat down to eat, June realized they had spent the entire day in each other's company without a single awkward silence or moment of discomfort. "This is delicious," Frank said, sampling the fish. "Your first catch," Expertly cooked. You're a natural at this ranch life, June. The compliment, delivered without flattery or exaggeration, meant more to June than all the flowery praise Robert Ashton had ever given her. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm trying to learn." "You're doing more than trying," Frank replied, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "You're succeeding. I know this isn't the life you were raised for, but you've taken to it with a determination that's impressive." June felt her cheeks warm at the genuine admiration in his voice. "I've always believed that circumstances don't define us. It's how we respond to them that matters." Frank studied her for a moment, then nodded. "A wise philosophy, and one you clearly live by." The conversation turned to plans for the coming week: fields that needed tending, a fence section that required repair, vegetables in the garden nearly ready for harvesting. It was ordinary talk, the kind that married couples across the country might have had that same evening, yet to June it felt significant. They were building something together, day by day, not just a marriage but a partnership. That night, as they readied for bed, the routine was familiar but still marked by a certain shyness. They had shared a bed for a week now, but always with a careful distance maintained between them, Frank keeping his promise to wait until June was comfortable. As June slipped beneath the quilt, however, she found herself wondering how much longer that distance needed to exist. She was coming to know this man, to respect him, even to care for him. The attraction she felt was no longer purely practical or born of gratitude, but something genuine, a response to his kindness, his integrity, and yes, his physical presence. The way his shoulders filled out his work shirts, the strength in his hands, the smile that transformed his serious face, all of these had become increasingly difficult to ignore. "Frank," she said softly as he extinguished the candle. "Yes, thank you for today, for teaching me to fish, for everything." In the darkness she felt rather than saw him turn toward her. "You're welcome. I enjoyed it too." There was a pause filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, gathering her courage, June reached across the space between them and found his hand. Frank's breath caught audibly, but after a moment's hesitation, his fingers closed around hers. They fell asleep that way, hands joined in the middle of the bed, a small bridge across the gulf that separated them, the first step toward truly becoming husband and wife in every sense. The following week brought a heat wave to the Colorado mountains, the June sun beating down with unexpected ferocity. Work on the ranch became more challenging as Frank and June adjusted their schedules to avoid the worst of the midday heat. June rose even earlier than usual, completing her indoor chores in the relative cool of the morning. By midday, when the cabin became stifling despite open windows and doors, she retreated to a shady spot near the creek, bringing mending or other portable tasks with her. Frank, concerned about the cattle in the heat, spent long hours ensuring they had access to water and shade. He returned each evening exhausted, his shirt soaked with sweat, his face reddened by the sun despite his wide-brimmed hat. On Wednesday afternoon, June was at the creek, washing laundry in the cool water when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Looking up, she saw Frank riding toward her at a faster pace than usual, leading a second horse. "Everything all right?" she called, rising to her feet with concern. Frank dismounted quickly. "Got a message from Daniel Cooper. A supply wagon's coming through from Denver, should reach Georgetown by sundown. Has some items we've been waiting for, including that window glass we need for the bedroom." The bedroom window had been broken in a storm the previous month, with a board temporarily nailed over it until replacement glass could be obtained. "But it's nearly 20 miles to town," June protested. "You've already been working all day in this heat." Frank nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. That's why I thought we could both go. Make an overnight trip of it. Stay at Harrigan's hotel, pick up the supplies in the morning, be back by tomorrow evening." He hesitated, adding, "Only if you're willing, of course. I could go alone, but—" "No, I'd like to come," June said quickly. The idea of a night in town, perhaps with a proper bath and a meal she didn't have to cook herself, was appealing after the relentless heat of the past few days. "Good. I've brought Daisy for you. If we leave within the hour, we can make town before dark." June hurriedly gathered the wet laundry, deciding it would have to wait until their return. She changed into her second-best dress, packed a few essentials in a small bag, and they were on their way, riding side by side along the trail that led to Georgetown. Despite the heat, the journey was pleasant. A light breeze provided occasional relief, and the scenery was as magnificent as June remembered. Frank pointed out landmarks she hadn't noticed on previous trips, a rock formation that resembled a sleeping bear, a distant waterfall visible only from a certain angle, the remains of an abandoned cabin built by some long-gone prospector. They reached Georgetown just as the sun was setting, the town still bustling with activity despite the late hour. The supply wagon had indeed arrived and was being unloaded at the general store, where Daniel greeted them with enthusiasm. "Frank, June, perfect timing. Your window glass is right here, and those seeds you ordered, June. Oh, and a letter came for you last week." He handed June an envelope addressed in her mother's precise handwriting. June's heart leapt at the sight. It had been over a month since she'd left Philadelphia, and this was the first news from home. She tucked the letter into her pocket, saving it to read in the privacy of their hotel room. After arranging for their supplies to be ready for pickup in the morning, they made their way to Harrigan's hotel. The proprietor remembered them from June's arrival and beamed as he handed over a room key. "Best room in the house for you folks. Has a real bathtub with hot water piped in. Just installed it last month." June could hardly contain her delight at this news. A proper bath after days of makeshift washing at the creek sounded like heaven. Their room was indeed comfortable, with a large bed, a small sitting area, and the promised bathroom with its gleaming copper tub. Once they were alone, Frank cleared his throat awkwardly. "Why don't you bathe first? I'll go down to the restaurant and see about supper arrangements." June appreciated his consideration. "Thank you, I won't be long." After Frank left, June indulged in a luxurious soak in the tub, washing away trail dust and the lingering effects of the heat wave. Clean and refreshed, she changed into her best dress, the blue silk she had worn for their wedding, and sat on the edge of the bed to read her mother's letter. The news from Philadelphia was mostly good. Her sisters were well, the shop was thriving with summer orders, and Mary had a suitor, a young lawyer from a respectable family. Her mother expressed concern about June's hasty marriage, but seemed reassured by the tone of June's first letter home. "Your description of Mr. Ryder sounds promising," she wrote. "While I cannot fully approve of such an unorthodox arrangement, I pray that you have found happiness and security in your new life. Your sisters and I miss you terribly, but understand your desire for a fresh start after the unfortunate business with Robert." There was a soft knock at the door, and Frank entered, his hair damp and combed back from his forehead, wearing a clean shirt and his best trousers. "Bath's free if you'd like to use it," June said, folding her letter. "The water's still warm." Frank nodded gratefully. "I will. There's a table waiting for us downstairs whenever we're ready." While Frank bathed, June sat by the window, watching the activity on Georgetown's Main Street. The town was so different from Philadelphia, smaller, less refined, yet vibrant with a frontier energy that she found increasingly appealing. When Frank emerged from the bathroom, clean-shaven and smelling faintly of soap. June was struck anew by how handsome he was when not covered in ranch dirt and sweat. His hair, darker when wet, curled slightly at his collar, and his freshly shaved jaw revealed a strong chin she usually only glimpsed in the evenings. "Ready for supper?" he asked, offering his arm with a formality that made her smile. "Absolutely," she replied, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow. The hotel restaurant was busy but not crowded, with linen-covered tables and actual glass rather than tin for the water. They were seated near a window overlooking the street, and a waiter promptly brought menus printed on thick cardstock. "Order whatever you like," Frank said. "It's not often we get to eat food we didn't have to prepare ourselves." June chose roast chicken with vegetables and a slice of apple pie for dessert, while Frank opted for beefsteak and potatoes. The food was excellently prepared, and they ate with appreciation, their conversation flowing easily after weeks of getting to know each other. "What did your family have to say?" Frank asked, nodding toward the letter June had tucked into her pocket. June smiled. "Everyone is well. My youngest sister has a suitor. My mother is cautiously optimistic about my marriage despite her initial reservations." Frank looked concerned. "She didn't approve of you coming west," she worried, naturally. "That I was being impulsive, that I might end up in a worse situation than the one I was leaving." June met his eyes. "But I assured her in my letter that you are a good man and that I'm content with my decision." Frank's expression softened. "Are you content, I mean?" The question, asked with genuine concern, deserved an honest answer. "Yes," June said simply. "More than I expected to be. The ranch is beautiful, the work is satisfying in its own way, and you—" She hesitated, then continued, "You've been kind and patient, a better husband than I had any right to hope for in such an arrangement." Frank reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You sell yourself short, June. Any man would be fortunate to have you as his wife. Your kindness, your determination, your willingness to adapt to a life so different from what you knew, these are rare qualities." The sincerity in his voice made June's chest tighten with emotion. This wasn't mere politeness or the kind of empty flattery she'd received from suitors in Philadelphia. This was honest appreciation from a man who valued substance over appearance, character over social standing. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a great deal coming from you." Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them deepening in a way that made June's pulse quicken. The waiter's arrival with their dessert broke the moment, but the warmth remained as they enjoyed their pie and coffee. After supper, they strolled along Georgetown's Main Street, looking in shop windows and enjoying the cooler evening air. The town had come alive with nighttime activities. A saloon down the street spilled piano music and laughter onto the boardwalk, while couples and families promenaded much as they might have on a Philadelphia avenue, albeit in less formal attire. "It's a fine little town," Frank observed. "Growing every year with the silver mines doing well." "Do you ever miss city life?" June asked, curious about the years he'd mentioned working his way west from Ohio. Frank considered this. "Not really. I spent some time in St. Louis and Denver, but cities always felt confining to me. Too many people, too little sky." He glanced down at her. "What about you? Do you miss Philadelphia?" "I miss my family," June admitted. "And certain conveniences, libraries, theaters, shops with the latest fashions, but I don't miss the constraints of society there. The constant awareness of being judged, of falling short of expectations." Frank's brow furrowed. "Who would judge you wanting?" The genuine confusion in his voice made June smile. "In Philadelphia society, a woman's primary value is in her appearance and her connections. I had decent connections through my father's former business associates, but I never—" She gestured vaguely at her figure, conformed to the ideal. Frank's expression darkened. Then Philadelphia society is populated by fools. He said it with such conviction that June couldn't help but laugh, though the compliment warmed her deeply. You're very kind to say so. It's not kindness, it's truth. Frank stopped walking, turning to face her directly. June, you're beautiful. Not in some flimsy, fashionable way that changes with the seasons, but in a real, substantial way that matters. The words, spoken with such earnestness under the glow of the street lamps, made June's breath catch. No man had ever looked at her the way Frank was looking at her now, as if she were precious, desirable, worthy of admiration. Frank, she began, but found she had no words to continue. Understanding seemed to pass between them without speech. Frank offered his arm again, and they continued their walk back to the hotel, the night air suddenly charged with anticipation. In their room, the awkwardness that had marked their previous bedtimes was notably absent. Instead, there was a new awareness between them, a tension that was neither uncomfortable nor unwelcome. June removed her hairpins, letting her chestnut waves fall loose around her shoulders. In the mirror, she caught Frank watching her, his expression soft with wonder. "May I help you with your buttons?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "They look difficult to reach." June nodded, turning her back to him. Frank's fingers were gentle as he undid the long row of buttons down her spine, his touch warm even through the fabric of her dress. When the last one was unfastened, he let his hand rest briefly at the small of her back, a gesture that sent a shiver of anticipation through her. "Thank you," she whispered, not turning around. "June," Frank said softly, his hands moving to her shoulders, turning her to face him. "I know we started this marriage backward. Vows before courtship, living as husband and wife before truly knowing each other. But these past weeks—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I want you to know that I don't regret a moment of it, and I hope that you might be coming to care for me as I've come to care for you." The vulnerability in his face, the honesty in his words, melted the last of June's reservations. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in answer. The kiss began gently, a tentative exploration, but quickly deepened as Frank responded with an intensity that surprised and delighted her. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him, while her hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the strength beneath his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing rapidly. Frank rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I've wanted to do that since Georgetown," he admitted. "Since the moment I saw you in the hotel parlor, looking nervous but so determined." June smiled, her heart full. "Even though I wasn't what you expected," Frank opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with earnest sincerity. "You were exactly what I needed, June. I just didn't know it until you arrived." That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, Frank and June truly became husband and wife, their bodies joining as their lives had already begun to do. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, June marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from broken engagement and wounded pride in Philadelphia to genuine love in a Colorado mountain town. "What are you thinking?" Frank asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. June smiled in the darkness. "That sometimes life's detours lead exactly where we need to go." Frank's arms tightened around her. "I'm mighty glad yours led to Georgetown." "So am I," June whispered, nestling closer to the man who had started as a stranger but was rapidly becoming the center of her world. The return journey to the ranch the following day was filled with a new sense of companionship. They rode side by side, their supplies packed securely on a pack horse borrowed from the livery stable, occasionally exchanging glances that held the warmth of their newfound intimacy. As they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, June felt a surge of emotion that surprised her with its intensity. This place, which had been merely her destination a few weeks ago, now felt like home. Frank seemed to sense her thoughts. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," he said softly. June smiled, the name feeling right in a way it hadn't before. "It's good to be home, Mr. Ryder." Life on the ranch continued with its established rhythms, but with a new undercurrent of warmth and affection. June found herself singing as she worked, and Frank whistled cheerfully as he went about his chores. In the evenings, they sat closer together by the fire, sometimes reading aloud from one of the few books Frank possessed, sometimes simply talking about their days. And at night, they explored this new dimension of their relationship with increasing confidence and joy, discovering in each other a passion neither had known they possessed. July brought the promised dinner with the Wilsons, who welcomed June warmly into their home on the outskirts of Georgetown. Martha Wilson, observant as ever, noticed the change in the couple's demeanor immediately. "Well," she said to June as they prepared dessert in the kitchen, "it seems married life agrees with you." June blushed but couldn't suppress her smile. "It does, Frank is. He's a good man." Martha nodded sagely. "I always knew he would be, to the right woman." She gave June a knowing look. "And you, my dear, are clearly the right woman." The summer passed in a blur of activity. The vegetable garden flourished under June's care, providing fresh produce for their table and enough extra to preserve for winter. Frank's cattle thrived on the abundant grass, and the ranch prospered. In late August, June received another letter from Philadelphia. After reading it, she sought out Frank in the barn where he was repairing a harness. "My sister Mary is getting married in October," she announced. "To that lawyer I mentioned, Henry Blackwell." Frank looked up from his work. "That's good news, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. He seems like a decent man from what my mother writes." June hesitated. "She asks if we might attend." Frank set aside the harness, giving her his full attention. "Philadelphia is a long journey, I know, and expensive. I've already written to say that we likely can't make it." June tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "The ranch needs you here." Frank studied her face, then nodded decisively. "We'll go." "What? But you just said—" "I said it's a long journey, which it is, but Daniel Cooper has been looking for an opportunity to learn more about ranching. He could watch the place for a couple of weeks." Frank stood, crossing to where June stood. "Your family is important, June, and I'd like to meet them. Put your mother's mind at ease about the man her daughter married." June threw her arms around him, her heart full. "Are you sure? It's a significant expense." Frank hugged her close. "We've had a good year. The cattle are fat, beef prices are up. We can afford it." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "Besides, I think it's time my wife had a chance to show me her world after months of adapting to mine." The journey to Philadelphia in early October was indeed long, requiring a stage coach to Denver, a train across the plains and mountains, and finally another train to Pennsylvania. June watched with amusement as Frank, accustomed to the wide open spaces of Colorado, adjusted to the confines of train travel and eventually the bustling streets of Philadelphia. Her family's reception was cautious at first, particularly from her mother. Sarah Evans studied Frank with the critical eye of a woman who had seen one daughter's heart broken by an unworthy man. But Frank's straightforward manner and evident devotion to June soon won her over. "He's nothing like that weak-willed Robert Ashton," Mrs. Evans confided to June the night before Mary's wedding. "There's substance to your Mr. Ryder, character." June smiled, watching from the parlor doorway as Frank entertained her younger sisters with tales of mountain lions and silver mines. "Yes, there is." And he looks at you as if you hung the moon," her mother added softly. "That's worth more than all of Robert Ashton's family connections." The wedding was lovely, with Mary radiant in white silk and her Henry gazing at her with obvious adoration. June felt a pang, realizing that she and Frank had missed this traditional celebration of their own union. Yet as she glanced at her husband, handsome in his best suit despite his obvious discomfort with formal attire, she wouldn't have traded their simple ceremony in Georgetown's church for anything. At the reception, held in the garden of the Blackwell family home, June was startled to see a familiar face among the guests: Robert Ashton, accompanied by his wife, the former Eliza Whitmore. "He's Mary's husband's cousin," her sister Anne explained when she noticed June's surprise. They couldn't very well not invite him. June felt Frank's hand at the small of her back, a reassuring presence. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," June replied, realizing it was true. Seeing Robert again stirred no emotion beyond a mild curiosity. The heartbreak and humiliation that had once seemed so devastating now felt distant and unimportant. As if drawn by their attention, Robert looked up and saw them. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, his wife trailing uncertainly behind him. "June," he said, nodding politely. "It's been some time." "Hello, Robert," June replied calmly. "May I introduce my husband, Franklin Ryder? Frank, this is Robert Ashton and his wife, Eliza." Frank extended his hand, his grip perhaps slightly firmer than necessary as he shook Robert's hand. "Pleasure to meet you both." "Congratulations on your marriage." Robert seemed taken aback by Frank's friendly demeanor and perhaps by his imposing presence. At 6 feet tall with the solid build of a working rancher, Frank made Robert look insubstantial by comparison. "Thank you," Robert replied. "And congratulations to you as well. I understand you live in Colorado now, June." "Yes, we have a cattle ranch near Georgetown." June felt a surge of pride as she added, "Frank is one of the most respected ranchers in the area." Eliza spoke up, her voice soft and slightly nervous. "It sounds very adventurous, living in the wilderness." June smiled, thinking of the mountain views from their cabin, the clear waters of the creek, the vastness of the star-filled sky at night. "It's beautiful country, different from Philadelphia, certainly, but I've found it suits me well." Robert studied her face, seeming puzzled by the confidence he saw there. "You look well, June. Happy?" "I am," June replied simply, leaning slightly into Frank's side. "Very happy." After a few more moments of awkward conversation, Robert and Eliza made their excuses and moved on to greet other guests. June felt Frank's arm slip around her waist as they watched the couple depart. "So that's the fool who let you go," he murmured. June looked up at her husband, at his clear blue eyes, his sun-browned face, the strength and kindness evident in every line of his features, and felt a rush of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. "His loss was my gain," she said softly. "And yours too, I hope." Frank's smile was answer enough. They returned to Colorado 2 days after the wedding, both secretly relieved to leave the confines of the city behind. As the train carried them westward, June reflected on how completely her perspective had changed in just a few months. Philadelphia, once her entire world, now felt foreign and constraining. She found herself longing for the clean mountain air, the open spaces, and the simple routines of ranch life. Their return to the ranch was joyful, with Buck racing to greet them, and even the chickens seeming pleased by their reappearance. Daniel Cooper had managed things competently in their absence, though he admitted with a laugh that he was more than ready to return to his general store. "Ranching's hard work," he told Frank as he prepared to depart. "I'll stick to selling supplies to you ranchers instead." That evening, as they sat by the fire in their cabin, savoring the quiet after weeks of travel and social obligations, Frank turned to June with a thoughtful expression. "What are you thinking?" she asked, recognizing the look. "I was just wondering how you really feel about all this." He gestured around them at the cabin with its simple furnishings, the isolation, the rugged life they shared. "After seeing Philadelphia again, being with your family, enjoying city conveniences. Do you regret your decision?" June set aside her mending, moving to sit beside him on the bench he'd crafted from pine logs. "Not for a moment," she said firmly. "I won't pretend there aren't things I miss occasionally: hot baths that don't require hauling water, shops with fresh pastries, my mother and sisters. But this is my home now, Frank. Our home. And I wouldn't trade it for all the conveniences of Philadelphia." The relief in his expression was palpable. "I've been worrying about that, if I'm honest, that you might realize what you've given up to be here." June took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "What I've gained far outweighs what I've left behind, a home of my own, work that matters. A husband who values me for who I am, not what society thinks I should be." She paused, then added softly, "And perhaps someday a family to share it all with." Frank's eyes widened slightly. "June, are you saying?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Doctor Wilson confirmed it before we left for Philadelphia. I wanted to be certain before I said anything. We're going to have a baby, Frank. In April." The joy that transformed Frank's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He gathered her into his arms, his embrace gentle despite his evident excitement. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." That night, as they lay together in their bed, Frank's hand rested protectively over the slight curve of June's stomach, still barely noticeable beneath her nightgown. "Boy or girl doesn't matter to me," he murmured sleepily. "Just healthy and happy." June smiled in the darkness, her heart full to bursting. "And loved," she added. "So very loved." "That goes without saying," Frank agreed, pulling her closer. "With you as its mother, how could it be anything else?" The months that followed were busy ones. Frank worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch for winter and the coming baby, adding a small second bedroom to the cabin, reinforcing the barn to better withstand heavy snow, and stockpiling firewood until June teased that they had enough for 3 winters, not one. December brought the first heavy snowfall, transforming the landscape into a sparkling wonderland. Despite the challenges of winter in the mountains, June found a deep contentment in the season's quiet rhythms. With outdoor work limited by weather, Frank spent more time in the cabin, working on small projects, crafting a cradle for the baby, repairing tools, reading aloud in the evenings from the books Martha Wilson had lent them. Christmas was simple but meaningful, with gifts exchanged by the fire: a new shirt June had sewn for Frank from fabric purchased in town, a delicate silver brooch Frank had ordered from Denver for June, and small tokens they had each made for the baby. A tiny quilt from June, a carved wooden rattle from Frank. As winter gave way to spring, June's condition became increasingly evident. Frank grew more protective, insisting on taking over the more strenuous chores despite June's protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. "The doctor said moderate activity is beneficial," she reminded him after he firmly removed a bucket of water from her hands. "Hauling water isn't moderate," Frank countered. "Besides, you have more important work to do now." His gaze dropped to her rounded belly, and his expression softened. "Growing our child is the most important job on this ranch." June couldn't argue with the tenderness behind his words, though she insisted on maintaining as many of her usual tasks as she comfortably could. The garden needed spring planting, bread needed baking, and life on the ranch continued regardless of her condition. April arrived with gentle rains that turned the valley a vibrant green. The cattle were healthy, with several new calves adding to the herd, and the garden sprouted promising rows of vegetables. Frank had arranged for Martha Wilson to stay with them for the birth, and the older woman arrived 2 weeks before June's expected time, bringing with her a wealth of practical experience and comforting assurance. "First babies often take their time," Martha told June as they sat together on the porch, enjoying a rare, warm afternoon. "But when the time comes, it happens quickly enough." June nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. Despite Martha's reassurances and her own preparations, the prospect of giving birth so far from doctors and hospitals was daunting. The nearest physician was Dr. Wilson in Georgetown, a 20-mile journey that would take hours even in good weather. Frank, sensing her anxiety, had taken to sleeping in the main room of the cabin, insisting that June needed her rest without him disturbing her. But June knew his true motive was to be immediately available should she need him during the night. On the evening of April 18th, as a spring thunderstorm rolled across the valley, June felt the first twinges of what she recognized as true labor pains. They were mild at first, easy to breathe through, but by midnight they had intensified to the point where Martha Wilson was boiling water and laying out clean linens while Frank paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. "Is there nothing I can do?" he asked when Martha emerged briefly for more hot water. The older woman smiled kindly. "Pray, Frank, and perhaps ready the wagon just in case. But June is strong and everything is progressing normally." The labor continued through the night, with June drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Martha's calm presence was a blessing, her experienced hands guiding June through each intensifying wave of pain, her voice steady with encouragement. Dawn was breaking over the mountains when June finally heard the cry she had been working toward all night, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Martha's face appeared in her field of vision, beaming with satisfaction. "You have a son, my dear, a beautiful, healthy son." Tears streamed down June's face as Martha placed the tiny, red-faced infant on her chest. He was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair and lungs that worked impressively well, judging by his continued crying. "Frank," June called weakly. "Frank, come meet your son." The bedroom door burst open, and Frank was at her side in an instant, his face a mixture of awe, relief, and joy as he gazed down at their child. "He's magnificent," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand with one work-roughened finger, "just like his mother." June smiled tiredly up at her husband, seeing in his eyes the same overwhelming love she felt for this small miracle they had created together. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings, but had never reached a final decision. Now, looking at their son's face, Frank seemed struck by inspiration. "David," he suggested, "after your father, if that would please you." Fresh tears welled in June's eyes at this unexpected gesture. "David Franklin Ryder," she said softly. "It's perfect." Martha Wilson, having discreetly attended to the necessary tasks following the birth, now approached with the baby wrapped in a clean blanket. "Here, Frank, hold your son while I help June get comfortable." Frank looked momentarily terrified, but he carefully took the bundle from Martha, cradling it with a tenderness that belied his strength. As June watched, her husband's face transformed with wonder, all traces of fear melting away as he gazed down at their child. "Hello, David," he murmured. "Welcome to the world, son. Your mother and I have been waiting to meet you." The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and joy as June and Frank adjusted to life with a newborn. Martha stayed for a week, her experienced help invaluable as June recovered her strength and learned the rhythms of caring for an infant. When she finally departed, promising to return for a visit soon, June felt a momentary panic at being solely responsible for this tiny life. "We'll manage," Frank assured her, his arm around her shoulders as they stood in the doorway, watching Martha's wagon disappear down the trail. Together, and they did. David proved to be a good-natured baby, with his father's blue eyes and a disposition that tended toward contentment rather than fussiness. June quickly adapted to the demands of motherhood, finding unexpected joy in the simple routine of caring for her son. Frank was an attentive father, taking the baby for walks around the ranch when June needed rest, singing off-key lullabies that nonetheless seemed to soothe David, and gazing at his son with an expression of such pride that it made June's heart swell. Summer arrived with its busy schedule of ranch work, but Frank insisted on hiring a young man from a neighboring property to help with the cattle, allowing him more time at home with June and the baby. "The herd can wait," he told June when she protested the expense. These early months with David won't come again. His priorities had shifted, June realized, just as hers had. The ranch was still important, their livelihood depended on it, but family had become the center of their world. In late August, they made the journey to Georgetown for David's christening at the small church where they had been married just over a year earlier. Martha and James Wilson stood as godparents, beaming with pride as if David were their own grandchild. "He's thriving, Doctor," Wilson pronounced after a careful examination. "You're doing an excellent job, both of you." The compliment meant more to June than all the social approval she had once sought in Philadelphia. This, she realized, was what truly mattered, raising a healthy, happy child with a man who loved them both completely. As summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of gold to the aspen trees that dotted the mountainsides, June found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The advertisement that had caught her eye in a Philadelphia newspaper. The leap of faith that had carried her west. The moment of uncertainty when she'd first seen Frank's expression upon meeting her. "That just means more to love," he had said, and how prophetic those words had proven to be. More to love indeed, not just her fuller figure, which Frank had always admired, but the fullness of the life they had built together. A home, a child, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold, David sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Frank reached for June's hand. "I've been thinking," he began. June smiled, recognizing the thoughtful tone that usually preceded one of her husband's more significant announcements. "About what?" "About us. About how lucky I am that you answered my advertisement, that you were brave enough to travel all this way to marry a stranger." June squeezed his hand. "I think we've established that I got the better end of that bargain." Frank shook his head, his expression serious. "No, June, you could have had your pick of men in Philadelphia, regardless of what you believe. You're beautiful, intelligent, kind." He paused. "I've never told you this, but when I first saw you in that hotel parlor, I wasn't disappointed. I was intimidated." "Intimidated?" June couldn't hide her surprise. "By me, by your elegance, your education, your obvious refinement." Frank looked slightly embarrassed by the admission. "I thought you'd take one look at this rough rancher and be on the next stage back east." June laughed softly. "And I thought you were disappointed by what you saw a woman who wasn't the delicate, slender bride you'd expected." "I'm grateful every day that you're exactly as you are," Frank said, his voice low and sincere. I meant what I said that first day, though I expressed it poorly. There is more of you to love, June Ryder, and I do love every bit of it. Your strength, your determination, your kindness, your body that carried our son, all of it. Tears welled in June's eyes at the heartfelt declaration. I love you too, Frank, more than I ever thought possible when I stepped off that stagecoach. Frank leaned in, kissing her with a tenderness that still held the spark of passion that had grown between them. When they separated, he kept his forehead pressed to hers, his eyes closed as if in prayer. I have something for you, he said softly, reaching into his pocket. I've been saving for it since before David was born. He withdrew a small velvet box, the kind that came from a proper jeweler, not the general store. June gasped softly as he opened it, revealing a gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. We never had a proper engagement, Frank explained. No ring, no courtship. I thought, maybe we could remedy that. Not the order of things, obviously, but at least the symbol. He removed the ring from its box, holding it between them. June Evans Ryder, mother of my son, heart of my heart, will you continue to do me the honor of being my wife? Not because of an advertisement or practical considerations, but because I love you more than life itself. June held out her trembling hand, watching through tears as Frank slid the ring onto her finger, where it nestled against the simple gold band they had purchased for their wedding. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley they both now called home, June looked at her husband, this man who had seen beyond appearances to the woman she truly was, who had given her not just his name and protection but his heart, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. In his arms, in this place, in the life they had built together. The advertisement had promised a hard-working rancher and a comfortable home. What she had found was a good man and a love greater than any she could have imagined, a love that saw her completely and cherished what it saw. That, June reflected as Frank gathered her close under the darkening sky, their son sleeping peacefully beside them, was worth every mile of the journey.